I'm Caroline, 17 female. I lived in a small suburban house that always felt a little too crowded, a little too loud. For most of my life, it was just me, my parents, and my older sister, Elizabeth. I'm a junior in high school, focused on getting good grades so I can get a scholarship and finally have a space of my own. My story isn't about some grand, dramatic event that happened in a boardroom or a courtroom. It's about how the four walls of my own home became a prison, and how my own family handed me an eviction notice on the day I was supposed to be celebrating my life. It's about how a single, desperate social media post brought the whole rotten structure crashing down. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My 17th birthday was supposed to be a milestone, a small beacon of light in an otherwise stressful year. All I wanted was a quiet day. Maybe a cake, a nice dinner with my family, and the new drawing tablet I'd been saving up for and dropping hints about for months. I'm not an artist by trade, but it's my escape. Sketching characters, designing worlds, it's the only place where I feel completely in control. In our house, control was a luxury I didn't have. My dad, Nathan, is a construction manager who's on the road more often than he's home. When he is home, he's exhausted and prefers to tune out the domestic noise. My mom, Mary, manages a retail store and carries the stress of her job home with her every single day. She's perpetually frazzled, and her patience is worn down to a thread. This left a power vacuum in the house that my sister, Elizabeth, was more than happy to fill. Elizabeth is 20, and to put it mildly, she's always been the family's squeaky wheel. Drama follows her like a shadow, and she's perfected the art of making every situation about her. 2 months before my birthday, she had announced she was pregnant. The father was her on-again, off-again boyfriend, Colin, a guy who drifted between gig work jobs and whose main ambition seemed to be mastering the latest video game. The news hit our house like a miniature hurricane. Mom's stress levels skyrocketed. Dad just sighed and retreated further into his work. Elizabeth, however, seemed to thrive on the chaos. Suddenly, the entire household revolved around her cravings, her appointments, her moods. My needs, already a low priority, were pushed completely off the list. The week leading up to my birthday was tense. Elizabeth and Colin had been having another one of their epic fights, and he'd been kicked out of his shared apartment with his friends. This meant he was practically living at our place, crashing on the lumpy couch in the living room. His presence made the small house feel even more cramped. He'd leave his empty energy drink cans everywhere, his giant shoes were a permanent tripping hazard by the door, and the living room TV was constantly blaring with the sounds of simulated warfare. I found myself hiding in my room more and more, my sanctuary. It was the only place in the house that was truly mine. I had painted it a calm shade of blue myself. My desk was perfectly organized for my schoolwork and my art, and my books were arranged just so. It was my haven. On the morning of my birthday, I woke up with a sliver of hope. Maybe today would be different. Maybe for just one day, the focus wouldn't be on the impending baby. I came downstairs to find Mom in the kitchen, looking more stressed than usual. "Happy birthday, honey," she said, her voice tight as she scribbled on a notepad. She didn't look up. Dad had already left for a job site 2 hours away, but he'd left a card and $50 on the counter. I appreciated it, but it felt impersonal, a transaction. Elizabeth was at the table, scrolling on her phone. She mumbled, "Happy birthday," without taking her eyes off the screen. Colin was still asleep on the couch, snoring loudly. So much for a special morning. I tried to stay positive. I had school and my friends would make a fuss, which would be nice. I'd see my family for dinner later. When I got home that afternoon, the atmosphere was even heavier than when I left. Mom and Elizabeth were in the middle of a hushed, intense conversation at the kitchen table. When they saw me, they fell silent. "Hey," I said, dropping my backpack. "What's going on?" Mom wrung her hands. "Caroline, we need to talk to you about something." My stomach dropped. This was the tone she used for bad news. Elizabeth just sat there, looking smug, one hand resting possessively on her stomach. "It's about Colin," Mom began, choosing her words carefully. His living situation, it's not stable, and with the baby coming, we need to provide a stable environment for Elizabeth. I nodded slowly, not sure where this was going. So, she took a deep breath. We've decided to let him move in here officially, until they can get on their feet. I just stared at her. Move in? Where? The couch was already occupied. Our house had 3 bedrooms, my parents', mine, and Elizabeth's, which was already overflowing with her things and the baby supplies she'd been accumulating. There was no spare room. Where is he going to stay? I asked, the words feeling like sand in my mouth. My mom looked at Elizabeth, who gave a slight nod. It was like she was giving my mother permission to drop the bomb. Well, honey, Mom said, her voice strained with false sympathy. You have the most organized room. It's the easiest one to clear out. I felt the blood drain from my face. Clear out? I whispered. What are you talking about? Elizabeth spoke up then, her voice sickly sweet. We need your room, Caroline. For me and Colin. It's the only one that makes sense. The baby will need a quiet space, and my room is too cluttered. I looked from my sister's triumphant face to my mother's pleading one. You want me to move out of my room? For him? The question hung in the air, thick and unbelievable. It's just temporary, Mom said quickly. You can take the couch for now. It's not a big deal. We have to make sacrifices for family. A sacrifice. On my 17th birthday, my gift was to sacrifice the only space I had in the world for my sister's layabout boyfriend. The hope I'd woken up with shattered into a million tiny pieces. This wasn't a request, it was a demand. My quiet birthday wish had been swallowed whole by the needs of the golden child and her self-made crisis. They weren't asking me to share or to compromise. They were telling me I was being displaced. And the worst part? The look on my sister's face told me this had been her plan all along. The conversation, if you could call it that, ended with me standing in the kitchen, speechless and shaking. It wasn't a discussion, it was a decree. My mother, Mary, kept repeating the phrase, "It's for the baby," as if those 4 words could justify anything. Elizabeth sat there, a portrait of entitlement, looking as if she had just won a major victory. And in her world, she had. She had successfully annexed my territory. Don't be so dramatic, Caroline, Elizabeth said, finally getting up from the table. It's just a room. You're barely in it anyway. Always holed up with your books and drawings. The irony of her statement was apparently lost on her. The reason I was always in my room was to escape the constant chaos she created in the rest of the house. Where am I supposed to do my homework? I asked, my voice trembling. My art projects, all my stuff is in there. You can use the kitchen table, Mom offered weakly, and we can put some of your things in boxes in the garage. The garage was a damp, spider-infested space where forgotten furniture went to die. The thought of my sketchbooks and art supplies being stored out there made me feel sick. Colin chose that moment to wander into the kitchen, yawning and scratching his stomach. Hey, what's up? He asked, oblivious. Elizabeth beamed at him. Great news. Mom said you can move into Caroline's room with me. Colin's face lit up. For real? Awesome. That couch is killing my back. He didn't even look at me. I was a ghost in my own home, my presence an inconvenience to be solved. I turned and fled to my room, slamming the door behind me. I sank onto my bed, the calm blue walls suddenly feeling like a cage that was closing in. This was my space, my sanctuary. Every poster on the wall, every book on the shelf was a part of me. The idea of Colin, a man I barely knew and actively disliked, sleeping in my bed, his things cluttering my desk, was a violation. I called my dad, Nathan, hoping he would be the voice of reason. He answered on the 3rd ring, the sound of machinery loud in the background. I explained the situation, my words tumbling out in a frantic rush. I waited for the outrage, the promise that he would sort it out when he got home. Instead, there was a long, weary sigh. Caroline, listen, he said, his voice tired. Your mother and I discussed this. It's not ideal, I know, but Elizabeth is pregnant. She needs our support. Colin needs to be here for her. We can't have him living on the street. But why my room, Dad? Why do I have to be the one kicked out? It's the path of least resistance, honey, he said, and I could hear the resignation in his voice. You know how your sister is. It's easier this way. Just for a few months until they find their own place. Please don't make this harder than it already is. Don't make this harder. My world was being turned upside down, and he was worried about me making it difficult for them. The call ended, and with it, my last hope. My own father had co-signed my eviction. The betrayal stung more than anything. My parents were supposed to protect me, to be my advocates. Instead, they had chosen to sacrifice me for the sake of peace, which was really just another word for appeasing Elizabeth. The final insult came later that evening. There was no birthday dinner, there was no cake. The $50 from my dad's card lay on my dresser, feeling like blood money. Around 7 p.m., my mom knocked on my door. "Caroline, we need you to start packing a few things. Colin wants to bring his stuff over tonight." On my birthday, they weren't even giving me a single night's grace. I didn't answer. I just lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, tears silently streaming down my face. I heard them talking outside my door. Mom's soft, pleading voice and Elizabeth's sharp, impatient one. "Just go in and get her," Elizabeth said. "She's being a baby." The door opened. Mom stood there, her face a mask of weary apology. Elizabeth was behind her, arms crossed, looking annoyed. "Honey, please," Mom said. "Let's just get this over with." I sat up, my heart pounding with a mixture of grief and fury. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Get out of my room." "Excuse me," Elizabeth scoffed. "It's not your room anymore." That's when something inside me snapped. I stood up, my fists clenched. "It is my room until I am no longer living in this house, and you are not setting one foot in here with your stuff tonight. This is my birthday. You have taken everything else from me today. You will not take this." The force in my voice surprised even me. Mom looked taken aback. Elizabeth, however, looked furious. "You selfish little brat," she shrieked. "I am pregnant. I need this. Why do you always have to be so difficult?" The argument escalated. Voices were raised. Colin appeared in the hallway, looking awkward but offering no support. My mom just kept saying, "Girls, please calm down." But there was no calming down. This was a battle for my dignity, for my small corner of the world. In the end, they retreated, but it was a hollow victory. I knew it was only a temporary reprieve. They would be back tomorrow. I locked my door, something I never did, and pushed my dresser in front of it. I sat at my desk, the room feeling both like a fortress and a prison. I looked at the brand new drawing tablet my friends had all chipped in to buy me, the one gift that had brought me joy that day. I was supposed to be trying it out, losing myself in a new creation. Instead, I was barricaded in my own bedroom, waiting for the next assault from the people who were supposed to love me most. The unwanted guest wasn't just Colin. It was the crushing realization that in my own family, I was disposable. I spent my 17th birthday night barricaded in my own room, feeling like a prisoner. I didn't sleep. I just sat at my desk, staring at the closed door, my mind racing. Every creak of the floorboards in the hallway made me jump. My phone buzzed intermittently with birthday messages from friends and extended family. Each cheerful notification felt like a little jab, a reminder of what the day was supposed to be. How could I reply, "Thanks, having a great day"? When my reality was this nightmare, I felt utterly alone, abandoned by the two people who were supposed to be my staunchest defenders. My parents had made their choice, and it wasn't me. By morning, a cold, hard resolve had settled in my gut. The tears were gone, replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt before. They thought I was a pushover, a quiet bookworm who would eventually roll over and accept her fate. They had mistaken my desire for peace for weakness. They were about to find out how wrong they were. I knew arguing with them was pointless. Logic and fairness were irrelevant in a household ruled by Elizabeth's whims and my parents' exhaustion. I needed a different kind of leverage. I needed witnesses. The entire conflict was happening behind closed doors, allowing my parents and sister to frame the narrative however they wanted. I was the selfish, dramatic teenager who wouldn't make a small sacrifice for her pregnant sister. The world needed to see the full picture. I pulled out my laptop and opened a social media page. I was part of a large, anonymous online community forum, a place where people shared stories and sought advice about family disputes. I had always been a lurker, reading the incredible stories of betrayal and triumph, but never imagining I would have one of my own to tell. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Part of me was terrified. This felt like crossing a point of no return, airing my family's dirty laundry online. It was a huge step, but what other option did I have? stay and become a resentful servant on the living room couch. They had backed me into a corner. It was time to fight my way out. I began to type. I titled the post, "My parents are kicking me out of my room for my pregnant sister's boyfriend on my 17th birthday." I laid out the facts, keeping my tone as objective as possible. I described the situation with Elizabeth and Colin, the cramped house, my parents' stress. I wrote about how my room was my sanctuary, the only place I felt safe and could focus on my future. I detailed the conversation from the day before, my mother's weak justifications, Elizabeth's smug sense of victory, and my father's tired resignation over the phone. I explained how they tried to force me to pack that very night, my birthday night, and how I had to barricade my door just to have a few hours of peace. I didn't use their real names, just initials. M for my mom, N for my dad, E for Elizabeth, and C for Colin. I was careful not to sound like a whiny teenager. I acknowledged the stress Elizabeth's pregnancy was putting on the family, but I also made it clear that the proposed solution was unjust and harmful to me, the child they were still legally responsible for. I wrote about my goals, getting good grades, winning a scholarship, and going to college. I explained how being forced to sleep and study in the main living area, the center of all the household chaos, would jeopardize that future. I finished the post by asking a simple question. Am I being selfish for refusing to give up my room and my future for my sister's irresponsible boyfriend? Before I hit post, I took some pictures. I took a photo of my room, clean and organized, my desk set up for studying. I took a photo of the lumpy, stained couch in the living room with Colin's discarded clothes and empty soda cans on the floor next to it. I took a picture of the dresser I had shoved in front of my door. I attached them to the post as evidence. Then, with a deep breath that felt like a leap off a cliff, I clicked the button. The post went live. I shut my laptop, my heart hammering in my chest. What had I just done? For a few minutes I was filled with regret. This could backfire horribly. What if no one cared? What if everyone sided with my family and called me a brat just like Elizabeth had? I waited. An hour passed. Then, too, I cautiously opened my laptop again and navigated back to the forum. My jaw dropped. The post had hundreds of comments. A few hours later, it would be thousands. The response was overwhelming, and it was almost entirely in my favor. People were outraged on my behalf. Kicking you out of your room on your birthday? That's not a sacrifice, that's a punishment, one comment read. Another said, your parents are failing you. They are enabling your sister's poor life choices at your expense. People offered advice. Some suggested I contact Child Protective Services, pointing out that providing a safe and stable living environment was my parents' legal duty. Others suggested I reach out to another family member, a grandparent or an aunt, someone outside the immediate toxic bubble. This idea stuck with me. My mom's sister, my Aunt Elsie, had always been a source of stability in my life. She was a nurse, she was kind, and she didn't put up with Elizabeth's nonsense. We weren't extremely close, but she always sent thoughtful birthday cards and asked me about my art whenever we saw her at family gatherings. The thought of contacting her was a tiny seed of hope. But the most impactful comments were the ones that simply validated my feelings. For the first time, I didn't feel crazy or selfish. I felt seen. The anonymous support of strangers gave me a surge of strength I didn't know I had. My little post, my digital cry for help, was becoming a wildfire. And I had a feeling my family was about to get burned. The digital wildfire I had started began to spread faster than I could have ever imagined. By the time I went to school the next day, after a tense and silent morning where my family communicated only through glares, my post had been shared from the original forum onto other social media platforms. People were screenshotting the text and my photos and sharing them on Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. My anonymous story was becoming a case study in parental failure and sibling entitlement. The initials I had used were pointless. The story was so specific that anyone who knew our family would be able to connect the dots. I hadn't anticipated this. My goal was to get validation and advice, not to become a local gossip topic. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. This was escalating beyond my control. My phone buzzed in my pocket during chemistry class. It was a text from a friend. OMG Caroline, is this you? with a link to a TikTok video. I opened it under my desk, my hands shaking. A creator who specialized in narrating dramatic online stories was reading my post aloud, word for word. She used a sad, gentle background music and paused for effect, her voice filled with sympathy for me. The video already had over 100,000 views. The comments were a torrent of support for me and condemnation for my family. Team Caroline all the way. Her parents need a reality check. I hope she gets out of there. I felt a bizarre mix of terror and vindication. My private pain was now public entertainment, but the public was on my side. The first real-world consequence hit that afternoon. My mom, Mary, called me, her voice hysterical. "Caroline, what did you do? My phone is blowing up. People from work are texting me. Someone sent my boss a link to a post about a terrible mother who kicks her daughter out of her room." I heard my sister wailing in the background. "Everyone knows it's us. Elizabeth's friends are all calling her." The anonymity was gone. Someone, a local person who read the story and knew my family, had started connecting names to the initials and sharing the information in local community Facebook groups. The story was no longer about an anonymous family. It was about the Nathan and Mary family, their entitled pregnant daughter Elizabeth, and their long-suffering younger daughter, Caroline. "You have to take it down, Caroline, now," my mom shrieked into the phone. "You are humiliating this family. You humiliated me when you decided my own room wasn't mine anymore on my birthday," I said, my voice cold and steady. The fear I'd felt earlier was being replaced by a strange sense of power. "I'm not taking anything down." I hung up before she could respond. The fallout was immediate and intense. My dad, Nathan, who usually stayed above the fray, called me next. He wasn't yelling, which was somehow worse. His voice was low and dangerous. "You have 5 minutes to delete that post, or you'll regret it, young lady." The threat hung in the air, but it felt hollow. What more could they do to me? Kick me out? They were already doing that. I let the 5 minutes pass. The post stayed up. The true explosion happened when the story reached my extended family. My grandparents, my dad's parents, lived a few towns over. They were old school, believers in family loyalty and quiet dignity. They were also the ones who had given my parents the down payment for our house years ago. My grandma called my dad, and from what I pieced together later, the conversation was apocalyptic. She had seen the post, shared by a friend from her church group. She had recognized the details instantly. She was mortified, not just by the public shame, but by the story itself. She had always had a soft spot for me, the quiet, artistic one, and the thought of me being tossed aside for Colin, a boy she had openly described as having no ambition, sent her into a rage. Then came the call I had been hoping for. It was my Aunt Elsie. Her voice was calm but firm. "Caroline, I just saw something online. I need you to tell me if it's true. Tell me everything." For the first time, I let the floodgates open. I told an adult who was actually listening. I cried, telling her about the constant stress, about being ignored, about the birthday, the betrayal, and the fear. She listened patiently, not once interrupting. When I finished, there was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "Okay," she said, her voice full of a nurse's quiet competence. "Here's what's going to happen. Pack a bag with everything you need for the next week. Clothes, school books, your laptop, and that drawing tablet. I am driving over right now. I'll be there in 40 minutes. You will wait for me outside. You are not spending another night in that house." The relief that washed over me was so intense it made my knees weak. Someone was coming. Someone was on my side. I did exactly as she said. I packed a suitcase and a backpack, my hands moving with purpose. I grabbed the tablet, my art supplies, and the sketchbooks my mom had threatened to put in the garage. As I was about to leave my room, I paused. I looked around at the space that had been my entire world. It was bittersweet. I was leaving, but not on their terms. I was walking out with my head held high, not being shuffled off to the couch. I walked downstairs, my bags in hand. My mom and Elizabeth were in the living room, their faces pale with shock and fury from the constant incoming calls and messages. They saw my bags. "Where do you think you're going?" my mother demanded. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Elsie. "I'm outside." I looked my mother in the eye. "I'm going somewhere I'm wanted," I said. I turned, walked out the front door, and didn't look back. The moment I stepped out of that house and into Aunt Elsie's car, It was like I could breathe again. The air, even the crisp, cool autumn air, felt lighter. Elsie didn't press me for details right away. She just gave me a long, warm hug and helped me put my bags in the trunk. Her car was clean and smelled faintly of lavender. It was a stark contrast to the chaotic, emotionally charged atmosphere I had just left. As we pulled away from tea, I looked back at my house. My mom was standing in the doorway, her face a mixture of anger and confusion. I saw the curtain in Elizabeth's window twitch. For a second, I felt a pang of something, guilt maybe, but it was quickly replaced by an overwhelming sense of relief. I was safe. The drive to Elsie's apartment took about half an hour. She lived in a nice complex in the next town over, closer to the hospital where she worked as a nurse. Her apartment was bright, clean, and peaceful. It was a one-bedroom, but it felt spacious and welcoming. She showed me to her spare room, which she used as a home office and guest space. It had a comfortable-looking sofa bed, a desk, and a window that looked out onto a small park. "You can stay here as long as you need, Caroline," she said, her voice soft but firm. "We'll get this all sorted out, I promise." I dropped my bags and just stood in the middle of the room, overwhelmed with gratitude. For the first time in what felt like forever, an adult was putting my needs first. That evening, we ordered pizza and sat down to talk. I showed her the post and the explosion of comments and shares. Her expression was grim as she scrolled through it all. "I had no idea it had gotten this bad," she said, shaking her head. "Your mother, she's always enabled Elizabeth, but this is a whole new level. And your father just letting it happen, I'm so disappointed in both of them." She explained that after she had called me, she had called my grandparents. They were already on the warpath. My grandmother, in particular, was furious that a child in her family was being treated like a second-class citizen in her own home. A plan was already forming, one that I wasn't even aware of. Aunt Elsie was just the first step. The next couple of days were a blur of settling in. Elsie helped me set up a little workspace for my schoolwork and my art. She made sure I had everything I needed. She drove me to and from school, even though it was out of her way. It was amazing how different my life felt with just a little bit of stability and support. I could do my homework in peace. I could draw for hours without being interrupted or made to feel guilty. I was still getting messages from friends, asking if I was okay, and the online story continued to have a life of its own. But in the quiet of Elsie's apartment, it felt distant, like something happening to someone else. My parents, however, were not keeping quiet. They started a campaign to get me back. My mom sent me a barrage of texts. First, they were angry. "You have caused enough trouble, Caroline. You need to come home and apologize." Then they became pleading. "Your sister is very stressed. This isn't good for the baby. Please think of the family." They even tried to guilt me. "How could you do this to us, after everything we've done for you?" The one thing they never said was, we were wrong. They never acknowledged their part in the situation or offered to change anything. They just wanted the problem, the public shame I had caused, to go away. They wanted me to come home and pretend nothing had happened. They wanted me to sleep on the couch. My dad tried a different tactic. He called Aunt Elsie, demanding that she return me. I could hear her side of the conversation from the other room. Her voice was professional, calm, and utterly immovable. "Nathan, Caroline is safe here," she said. "She is not a piece of property to be returned. She is a child who was put in an untenable situation. Right now, my only concern is her well-being." There was a long pause. "No, I don't think I am overstepping. I think you and Mary need to take a long, hard look at the choices you've made." She ended the call, and a few minutes later came into my room. "They're not listening to reason," she said with a sigh. "Which, honestly, is what I expected. So, we're moving on to the next step. Grandma and Grandpa want to have a family meeting. All of us. This Sunday. They're coming to my place. Are you up for that?" I was nervous. The idea of facing my parents and Elizabeth again was terrifying, but I wasn't alone anymore. I would have Aunt Elsie by my side, and my grandparents. It felt like I finally had a real team in my corner. This wasn't just about a bedroom anymore. It had become about my safety, my future, and whether I even had a place in my own family. I looked at Elsie, who was watching me with such kindness and strength in her eyes. "Yes," I said, my voice stronger than I thought it would be. "I'm ready." This meeting wasn't going to be a negotiation where I was expected to compromise. It was going to be a reckoning. My lifeline had not just pulled me from the water, she was teaching me how to stand on solid ground. The Sunday of the family meeting arrived with a heavy sense of dread. The air in Aunt Elsie's apartment, usually so calm, felt charged with anticipation. My grandparents arrived first. My grandpa, a quiet man who usually let my grandma do the talking, gave me a firm hug and said, "We've got your back, kiddo." My grandma's eyes were filled with a fiery resolve. She had been the one making the calls, laying down the law. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "No one gets to treat my grandchild like that. No one." Having them there, solid and unwavering, felt like having a shield. My parents, Nathan and Mary, arrived next with Elizabeth in tow. Colin was conspicuously absent, which I later learned was a direct order from my grandmother. They walked in looking defensive and resentful. My mom wouldn't meet my eye. My dad had a thunderous expression on his face. Elizabeth looked pale and puffy, but her default expression of sullen entitlement was firmly in place. They sat on the couch opposite the chairs where my grandparents Elsie and I were sitting. It felt less like a family gathering and more like a legal deposition. My grandmother started the proceedings. There was no small talk. "I want to know what in the world you two were thinking," she said, her voice dangerously low as she looked directly at my parents. "You were going to throw your 17-year-old daughter out of her room onto a couch for that boy on her birthday." My mom immediately launched into the prepared defense. "You don't understand, Mom," she said, her voice wavering. "Elizabeth is pregnant. She's emotional. We needed to provide a stable environment for her and the baby. We were just asking Caroline to make a small sacrifice for the family." Aunt Elsie snorted softly. "A small sacrifice? Mary, you were jeopardizing her future. Forcing a high school junior to sleep and study in the middle of a chaotic living room is not a small sacrifice. It's parental negligence." "It was temporary," my dad boomed, finding his voice. "Until they could get their own place. She blew this whole thing out of proportion by putting it on the internet and shaming us all." My grandfather spoke for the first time, his voice a low rumble. "She didn't shame you, Nathan. Your actions did. A man is supposed to protect his children. All of them, not throw one to the wolves to appease the other." My dad recoiled as if he'd been slapped. He had never been spoken to like that by his own father. The conversation devolved from there. My parents tried to paint me as ungrateful and dramatic. Elizabeth chimed in, tears welling in her eyes, about how hard her pregnancy was in. How I was being selfish and making it all about me. "I just needed support," she cried, and instead my own sister tried to ruin my life online. I stayed silent through most of it, letting my new advocates fight for me. But when Elizabeth accused me of trying to ruin her life, I had to speak. "Ruin your life?" I said, my voice shaking but clear. "I was the one who had to barricade myself in my room on my birthday. I was the one who was told I didn't matter." "You weren't asking for support, Elizabeth. You were demanding a surrender. You wanted my room, my space, my peace and quiet, and you didn't care what it cost me." I looked at my parents. "And you were going to give it to her. That's the truth." A heavy silence fell over the room. For the first time, my parents had no immediate comeback. The simple, unvarnished truth of my words seemed to suck the air out of their arguments. My grandmother seized the moment. "This living arrangement is no longer working," she stated, her voice leaving no room for debate. "It's clear that Caroline is not safe or supported in your home. Therefore, she will not be returning." My mom gasped. "What? You can't do that. We're her parents." "And you have failed in your duties as parents," my grandma retorted. "Elsie has agreed to let Caroline live with her for the remainder of the school year. We will be helping Elsie with any extra expenses." She then turned her attention to my dad. "And Nathan, that down payment we gave you for the house, we considered it a gift. But gifts come with expectations of decency and responsibility. We are cutting you off. No more financial help for emergencies. No more bailing Elizabeth out of her messes. You are on your own. You made this bed when you decided one child was more important than the other. Now you all have to lie in it." The finality in her tone was absolute. My mother started to cry. My father just sat there, his face ashen. He knew his mother. She did not make idle threats. Elizabeth looked absolutely horrified, the reality of the situation finally dawning on her. The endless financial safety net provided by our grandparents, the one she had always relied on, was gone. The meeting ended shortly after that. My parents and sister left, not with a bang, but with a defeated, silent shuffle. The air in the room instantly felt cleaner. When they were gone, I looked at my aunt and my grandparents, my heart full of a gratitude so immense I couldn't speak. They hadn't just offered me a place to stay. They had stood up for me, validated my worth, and fundamentally altered the toxic power dynamic of my family. The legal details of transferring custody for school and medical purposes would be sorted out in the coming weeks, but in that moment, the real decision had been made. I was no longer under my parents' roof or their control. I was free. The weeks and months following the family meeting were a period of profound change and adjustment. Living with Aunt Elsie was like stepping into a different world. Her home was an oasis of calm. There were no sudden screaming matches, no passive-aggressive comments, no feeling of walking on eggshells. There was just peace. We established a simple routine. She would go to work her long shifts at the hospital, and I would go to school. In the evenings, we'd often cook dinner together, talking about our days. She treated me not as a burden or a problem to be managed, but as a person. She asked about my classes, my friends, and my art. She looked at my sketches and gave genuine, thoughtful compliments. For the first time, I felt like my passions were seen as a valuable part of who I was, not just a childish hobby. The legal side of things was handled swiftly and quietly by my grandparents. They hired a lawyer who facilitated a temporary custody agreement, giving Aunt Elsie legal authority for my educational and medical needs. My parents, faced with the withdrawal of all financial support from my grandparents, signed the papers without a fight. I think they were too overwhelmed with their own suddenly complicated lives to put up much of a struggle. The reality of their new situation was setting in. Without the grandparental safety net, Elizabeth's pregnancy and Colin's unstable income became their problem alone. The financial pressure that they had tried to alleviate by sacrificing my well-being was now squarely on their shoulders, and it was heavier than ever. I had minimal contact with them. My mother would occasionally send me texts that swung wildly between guilt-tripping, "We miss you," and passive aggression, "I hope you're happy now that you've torn this family apart." I rarely responded. What was there to say? My dad never contacted me at all. I heard through the grapevine that the atmosphere in that house had become unbearable. Elizabeth and Colin were constantly fighting, the financial strain was immense, and my parents were at their wits' end. The quiet, organized room they had stolen Fr. Me had not brought them the peace they had hoped for. It had just become the new epicenter of the chaos. Meanwhile, my own life was blossoming. Freed from the constant stress of my home environment, my grades improved even more. I had the time and mental space to throw myself into my schoolwork and my art. I started building a portfolio for college applications, something I had only dreamed of before. My friends were thrilled for me, and I could finally have them over to hang out without feeling ashamed or anxious about my family's drama. I was also going to therapy, a suggestion from Aunt Elsie that my grandparents were happy to pay for. It helped me unpack the years of feeling second best and work through the anger and hurt I felt towards my parents and sister. I was learning that what happened wasn't my fault, and that it was okay to put my own needs first. A few months later, Elizabeth had her baby, a little boy. My grandma told me about it. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like hearing news about a distant relative. There was no joy, but there was no bitterness either. There was just a quiet sadness for the child born into such a dysfunctional situation. I sent a simple gift, a book, via my aunt, but I didn't visit. I wasn't ready for that, and I knew I had to protect my own peace. My 18th birthday was a stark contrast to my 17th. It was a joyous, peaceful celebration at Aunt Elsie's apartment. My grandparents were there, along with a few of my closest friends. Elsie had baked my favorite kind of cake, and her main gift to me was a professional-grade set of digital art pens for my tablet. There was no drama, no tension, no underlying feeling of being an inconvenience. There was just love and support. As I blew out the candles, I didn't wish for anything, because I felt like I already had it. I had a safe home, a supportive family in my aunt and grandparents, and a future that I was building for myself on my own terms. The original online post that started it all eventually faded into the internet's memory, but its impact on my life was permanent. It was a desperate act, a last resort, but it turned out to be the catalyst for my liberation. It taught me that my voice matters and that sometimes, the only way to fix a broken situation is to expose it to the light. I am now in my senior year, applying to colleges far away, excited for the next chapter. I still have a long way to go in healing my relationship with my parents, or even deciding if I want one, but I am no longer a victim of their choices. I am the architect of my own life, and the future is a blank canvas, waiting for me to create something beautiful.